And Hester is going to run it out past the 40 into Giants territory. He is going to go all the way. Touchdown, Chicago.
Trying to find somebody open and throws an interception. And it's Charles Woodson's 55th of his career.
Dives for the touchdown, San Francisco.
I want to play desperately, and I'm going to try to drive everyone nuts till they give me a shot.
Favre threw an almost impossible 336 career interceptions.
See that?
Yeah. We have here the Brett Favre interceptions calendar.
It's the lovable kicking bear doll. And guess what? It comes with its own goalpost. Isn't that neat?
Double doink.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear, Roast the Niner. Probably weren't expecting this deep into the offseason, but we've got a lot to talk about. We've got NFL draft updates, we've got some relocations in the league, and some bombshell news, which nobody cares about, but we're going to talk about it anyway. And of course, we are looking forward to the OTAs, training camps, and preseason, which is right around the corner. Comes up quick. It's only about 8 weeks away. So let's kick it off today with our favorite Bears fan who needs to talk about George Wendt. Rest in peace. Lord Uther, take us away. What's going on with your Chicago Bears?
We're going to win the Super Bowl because that's how every offseason goes, right? We supposedly make these great draft picks, and then there's all this hype, and we feel really good, and we're talking Super Bowl. It's like being a Cubs fan. And then next thing you know, we don't make the playoffs, and we get a high draft pick. So, Ditka Bears.
Coach,
so,
Coach Uther, did that book that was kind of talked about for 3 days, did that land in the Chicagoland area, or did people just kind of brush that off? The idea that Caleb Williams, someone was reporting like, I absolutely don't want to play for Chicago, and that's obviously awkward. Or was that just one of those day-long stories that didn't materialize?
It was talked about. How do you address that? Because I get it. I mean, Peyton Manning did the same thing, didn't he? He didn't want to play, what was it, in San Diego, and then winds up going, to Indy, right? And then who else did that happen with? John
Elway.
Dan Marino? John Elway, that's it. John Elway, right? So, it's easy to say those things or to make these stories up. It's just like the Jordan rules when Sam Smith wrote a book about what supposedly happened during one of the Bulls seasons. I'm sure there's some hearsay, and I always say as well, there's a little truth in everything. I'm sure he wasn't very excited to come here. But when you're going to be that high of a draft pick, there's a reason why you're that high of a draft pick, and that's because the teams that have a choice stink. So what do you think is going to happen? But kind of like before they drafted him, Urza Master and I had talked about how I was having issues that, he wanted a piece of the team, or at least the dad was talking about that. He wanted some kind of, stake in ownership and all this kind of stuff, a little bit of a prima donna type of attitude. And he hadn't done anything yet. So is that true? He denies that, but I'm sure there's some truth in that as well. So go ahead and throw that around. He still needs to earn his stripes here. I mean, obviously there's a lot of excitement. Ben Johnson allegedly has changed the culture. I still say this is the Bears' only shot at doing this. In other words, if this fails, they'll just go back to let's make a whole bunch of Uber money and keep it in the family and not spend anymore, right? I think that's going to be the end result. Is going to be we're going to be a gosh darn good team, or we're going to be in the toilet for the next however many years. And is this year 40 since we won a Super Bowl?
40th anniversary.
40th anniversary. So there's hope. They drafted that tight end. There's this talk of them going a little bit heavier with a double tight end type of offense. Maybe if I played NFL Madden, I could figure that out a little bit more and see if it would work out. But
still playing that Mike Ditka Ultimate Football for the IBM BC right there.
Ditka.
They got a B+ in their draft grade this year. I got to support him a little bit even as a Packer fan. I thought they had a decent draft. Could have been better, but that Colson Loveland, that's a good tight end pick. I just don't know if tight end fits their offensive scheme. You know what I mean?
I don't have any issue with the pick, and everyone was talking about the line, and the line, not the Lions, the line.
The line.
Well, and the Lions too, because
Shore
we
up
have
that
so many.
line.
Yeah.
You gotta protect the quarterback.
Yeah. Just get Ditka back out there. So I'm excited. I think anyone who loves football, right? Like, you're ready for August. You're ready for the preseason. You're ready for those first couple of games, and we're going to have all this hope. And they have a lot to prove. Do they need? So here's, I think, the key question: do they need to make the playoffs this year for it to be successful?
Yes.
And I think you're asking a lot, though.
Yes.
Yep.
When you bring in a new coach, I don't care how great the coach is. It's still his first year of trying to build this culture. And I think that's another problem, right? There's no patience anymore. Mm-hmm. Look at how long Mike Tomlin has been at Pittsburgh, which that's a story we can talk about in a second, because I can't wait for him and
His patience
Rodgers.
will be tested this season, trust me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. But they, that's a good, in my opinion, that's a good coach that has years and years and years to try and let things work out. Look at the NBA right now. The way the NBA is going, I mean, you've got the Nuggets, who almost made it to the finals, and they fire their coach who won a championship just 2 years ago, and they're going with, it's the trend in the NBA is younger and younger. We're talking like 35-year-old guys taking over as head coach. That's the trend right now, trying to figure out, the new scheme that can happen, and there's no patience. How do you fire a former championship coach after just 2 years? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
The Knicks, they just had their deepest run in 25 years. They've made the playoffs 4 out of 5 years that Tom Thibodeau, former Chicago Bulls coach, was there, and they pulled the trigger on him. I mean, what is your benchmark for success overall in the coaching world, like you say? Or Cleveland, or was it Cleveland Cavaliers? Somebody else, yanked it's like, win now at all costs is obviously the mentality. But yeah, I mean, what does that say to you? What coach wants to take that New York job?
Well, Tibbs, this is typical Tibbs, though, that he takes an average to below average team, coaches them very well, plays them to the point that the players break down because he doesn't like to put rookies in, he doesn't like to sub, and then he gets fired when they get to a point. Look where the Bulls were at. He got fired from the Bulls when they were in almost the exact same spot that the Knicks were in. This guy isn't given a chance to actually get them to the next level, but you can say the same thing about Doug Collins. Doug Collins had Jordan, Pip, and Grant, and the Bulls felt they had to make one more coaching change, and then Phil Jackson comes in, and all of a sudden, bam, it happens. So the question is, if Doug Collins stays on 1 or 2 more years, does he become Phil Jackson, or was it truly Phil Jackson's coaching or mentality that takes that team to another level?
And look at John Gruden when he took over in Tampa Bay. Same thing. You're walking into a great scheme, a great organization. It's kind of hard not to win a championship. Although I'd say in Phil Jackson's case, he won, scads of championships. So, I mean, that's maybe something separate. But let's move on to the San Francisco 49ers, because they also got a B+ in their draft. And I think that's a little harsh. I thought they did incredibly well, especially with those late round pickups. I thought they were fantastic. Gold Rush, what do you got? What do you got on your Niners?
Well, we did take a quarterback, believe it or not, from Indiana in a late round.
Curtis Rourke.
Right. That was, I think, just hopefully a cagey insurance policy. They had not locked up Brock Purdy yet. The big 49ers news, I mean, in combination with sort of their draft picks and so forth, they did let 11 veterans leave to free agency, some of them higher priced, some of them who had been with the team for a while, Charvarius Ward and Dre Greenlaw, and et cetera, et cetera. But the sort of, if you want to call them a core 3, they do lock up Brock Purdy for 5 years, $265 million.
Well-deserved.
George Kittle got 4 years and 76, so he's pretty much almost guaranteed to be a Niner now for the rest of his tenure. And Fred Warner got a 3-year extension at $63 million, and that's the heart and the soul of that defense right there. So Purdy, Kittle, Warner, finding the money to pay them, that was obviously kind of a big deal. In terms of the draft, again, their 11th overall pick was Michael Williams from Georgia to rush on the edge. They had Alfred Collins as a defensive tackle from Texas with like the 43rd pick, and then they took a linebacker from Oklahoma State, Nick Martin. So their focus again was on the D-line depth, trying to give somebody to work with Bosa. I think they just agreed to terms with a Philadelphia Eagle, and I want to say his name was Ruff or Huff, or I haven't quite got his name down yet, but they were going to pair him with Bosa. They want to just try to create more than just load up on Nick Bosa and then your pass rush is negated. But I think the best news for the 49ers this offseason, gentlemen, and I know you guys have poured over your own home and away schedules, the 49ers schedule for 2025. Obviously the NFC West, you have the Rams, you have a Seahawks team trying to sort of rebuild post-Pete Carroll. You have Arizona, who can either be really good or really terrible, and sometimes both in the same game. Besides the NFC West, which is certainly takes a backseat to the NFC North, the non-divisional foes for the Niners, it kind of screams on paper, not to sound confident or over cocky or whatever. It kind of feels like there's no excuses on the schedule. There's no, for example, we're at Philadelphia, then a week later hosting Kansas City, then a week later Dallas on a Sunday night. I mean, basically the games that they have to play this year, in addition to their division games, they've got to play New Orleans, Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, Atlanta. They have the Houston against their former coach, DeMeco Ryans. They have the New York Giants, Carolina, the Cleveland Browns, the Tennessee Titans, the Indianapolis Colts, and Lord Uther's own Chicago Bears on December 28th, post-Christmas, pre-New Year's showdown in prime time. But you hear that schedule, basically the NFC South, and then a couple of other teams there, and some AFC, Tennessee and Houston and so forth, and Jacksonville, I think, what are they, the AFC South. This is not a schedule where you're, quote, running a gauntlet. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think Green Bay may have a week or two of tough opponents either on the road or it's like back-to-backs or a short week, but this Niners schedule is, again, assuming health, assuming players do their jobs, all of these things, obviously, in a football season. That's not a schedule you look at and say, Jesus, we might be done by October. If with a healthy Christian McCaffrey and a Brandon Ayuk coming back from injury and Ricky Pearsall, the receiver, not getting shot in the offseason like he was last year, they have a chance to finish with, 11, 12, 13 wins. Again, assuming that Jacksonville stays lower, or the Giants. I don't have too much faith in those New York Giants or Carolina or what have you. Now, any team can beat any team on any given Sunday, granted. But I look at that schedule and I say that's a winnable schedule. You don't have any excuses on those front. You're going to have to go out and perform.
I agree. I think that's going to be a good year for the Niners, at least from a schedule perspective. But like you said, any given Sunday, but any given year, too. The other thing I would say about the Niners, despite having a really strong draft, is you lose some of those veteran guys. You bring in a lot of youth and have a very mixed team in terms of tenure. I think that makes it tough. I look at Green Bay, like we're sort of famous now for the last trailing years of being the youngest team in the league, and we're always competitive. We're almost always making the playoffs. Sure, we haven't had a championship in a while. Not as long as the Bears, but we haven't had it in a while. And that sucks, but we're always a contender despite our youth. I do think that there's something to be said about those teams that are a little bit, not the youngest, not the oldest, but somewhere in between. And I think the more you get to like that 50-50 or more where you've got kind of a split in the locker room, I hate to say it, but I think the young guys come in with this chip on their shoulder. Like, do these old guys know what's going on? I think whether it's said or unsaid, I think there's a little bit of a divide that as a NFL owner, I'd probably be a little concerned with the attitude. And that's, you look at these guys making big money. You're coming fresh out of college. You got all these accolades. You want the big money, but there's only so much money going around. So that's where I feel like a season can be made or broken on perception in the locker room. So my caution to the Niners would be you've got a pretty healthy mix there that you got to figure out some team unity going in. Now, everybody wants to win, but those young guys, everybody wants to be a star too. When everybody's young, anybody can claim that star each week. So it's a fun team environment. It's kind of like staying on your college team. You got a couple guys a couple years older, but nobody's extremely old, unless you get one of those like 9-year quarterbacks that comes in on a trade through the portal, which happens. But I don't know. On paper, Niners have an easy schedule. Niners have the right components to get deep.
How does your two teams' schedules look? Have you had time to pour them over? Is there a couple of weeks where you're kind of gritting your teeth, saying, "Man, we better be healthy when we hit that"?
I will say that December for the NFC North is going to be a run. And that Thanksgiving to the end of the year is tough. We play the Bears twice in the month of December 7th and December, I think, 20th. Looking at Packers' schedule, preseason is what it is. Throwing that out, we open the year hosting the Lions.
Oh.
That's going to be a great game, but it's going to be tough. I mean, that's a good gut check early. I don't want to lose at home, but if we lost that game, it's huge for how the rest of the year is going to play out. So I think a lot of pressure on week one. That kind of sucks. But we follow that up with hosting the Commanders, which, years past, I'd be like, Commanders, but they're no slouch anymore. You really got to take those guys seriously, too. So you could easily start this year 0-2 for Green Bay. But then you get the Browns. You get the Cowboys, you get the Bengals, then you get the Cardinals. So even if you start 0-2, you could end up 4-2 by week 6. Then you get a bye week. You come back against Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers. I mean, Who knew that we'd be talking about this? Which I don't know how that's going to play out. But I think by week 8, when that game rolls around, depending on how that's going, we may or may not face Aaron Rodgers. They might have their backup in. If, health obviously being in question at his age and attitude. I mean, quite frankly, it's still Aaron Rodgers, a.k.a. maybe Karen Rodgers, since he's left the Packers and slightly before. But I'll say I'm happy to see him back in the league. I think it's good for the NFL. It's an interesting story. I'd like to see him have some success in the AFC. I hope he loses that game, but I also hope that, he does well enough. I'd love to actually see a Packers-Steelers Super Bowl. Rodgers versus Love in the Super Bowl. I think that'd be an amazing story.
Wow.
But, so we come off our bye week, we play the Steelers, then we get the Panthers, which, look, the Panthers aren't good. I'm just going to throw that out there. So I think you have a bounce-back game. Even if you beat the Steelers, I think you beat the Panthers. But then you start running into the gauntlet. Now, we do have the Eagles next, and that's a tough game.
Yep.
Especially in early November. Follow that up with the Giants. The one thing I'll say about the New York Football Giants is, regardless of how bad they are, they have their weeks where they just go bananas. Somebody scores 4 touchdowns. So that's a trap game. And what I hate about a trap game is if we lose that game, that energy carries forward into what I call the last 8 weeks of holy shit football, because then we host the Vikings. We go to play the Lions. We host the Bears. We go to play the Broncos. Then we go to the Bears, host the Ravens, play the Vikings to finish out the year.
Wow.
That last 8 weeks is brutal.
Right.
And really, it's like the last 9 weeks you have to be concerned about. You have maybe 2 games in there that are on paper pretty winnable, the Giants and the Broncos. But that's a lot of division matchups crammed into one, and you got the Ravens. That's a tough schedule. We got an A- in the draft. Matthew Golden, I think, is a huge pickup. I'm really excited for Savion Williams. I think those two are going to be big players this year. But we also picked up some great rushers. We picked up, Warren Brinson out of Georgia. I think is going to be great for our defensive tackle spot. Beyond that, the team really hasn't changed all that much. We're getting most of the team back. We're in a really good position from both a practice squad standpoint. Your depth, I think, at receiver is really looking great this year. And we've got all of our core veteran guys that are coming back. We're ripping and roaring to make this season huge. I'd love to see them lock up Jair Alexander. I don't know if that deal's gotten done yet. I know he's deeply interested in staying in Green Bay. That has really warmed me to him. I know I talk a lot of shit about him most weeks. And even in the game, I complain about him. But he'd be good. He would be good to have as a presence on the team and in the locker room, whether he's in a diminished cornerback role or if he's just going to be your big game guy. I think that late part of the season, keeping him healthy, he could be a game changer for us. I don't know if he's an Al Harris type game changer or Charles Woodson, but definitely he's shown he's still got it. And when he's needed, he's been impactful. So I think it's a good year for the Packers. It's going to be a battle-tested year. We might not get 13 wins, but we certainly could win the division and get into the playoffs. And I think what I like about having a tougher schedule is if we do get into the playoffs, we come in being battle-tested and battle-ready. And that's something that in years past, when we've gotten in, whether we've won the division or wild-carded our way in, we haven't really had those gut check games leading in. And I think that's why we've ended up losing and not getting to a championship is, skin of our teeth, we've gotten in the playoffs or we've won a soft division and you play the Eagles or the Niners or somebody who's had a tougher year. Maybe they have a weaker win-loss record, but you're not ready for that kind of grit and determination. And, I'm not saying our team doesn't prepare. I'm not saying they don't play hard. I'm just saying when you don't play good teams, you don't win big games. You got to play the good teams. And I think, I don't think the Lions are going to be as good this year, but I think the Bears are going to be better. And that's scary because the NFC North was already the best division in football. So I think that's going to be, and the Bears could have an incredible year, and they don't play the Packers until late. So it could be super consequential, that last month of football, who wins the division. It could come down to the Bears and the Packers, which, again, really good for the NFL.
If your teams are ascendant, the Packers and the Bears, you guys feel are on the upswing. How far a fall will these Lions, who were crushed in last year's playoffs emotionally and physically, and the Vikings, who, as we know from from Urza Master, are always a coin flip, etc. How far do they fall, do you think, if your two teams are the ones who are ascending this season?
I think the Vikings are going to suffer the most. I think they've got issues at quarterback. They didn't go for Rodgers, which I think is a good move long term. In the short term, they're relying on J.J. McCarthy. He's a rook. I know he's been around. He's learned from some guys. I think they're going to be scrambling at some point this year to make a change at quarterback because I don't know he's going to do. I don't want to say well in terms of overall. I think well in terms of what the Vikings are expecting. This is always their problem at quarterback. They get a guy who does well, other than Kirk Cousins, who they just were blindly in love with and didn't see that he wasn't that good. You can be great on paper. That does not a championship make. But this guy's new. And like we talked, there's a lack of patience. If he's not undefeated 6-7 weeks into the schedule, they're going to be looking to make a change. He's going to be in the hot seat every single week. And as a first-time starter, that's incredibly demoralizing. And you don't, on that roster, I don't think you have a good, reliable veteran who could step in and take over like, what they had last year, or even with a Kirk Cousins on the roster. Like, there's problems in Minnesota. They still have Justin Jefferson. They're still going to win some games. They've got a good team. They just have terrible execution. And I think there's some issues at head coach that are going to crop up this year, because that's always going to happen when you have quarterback problems. Whose fault is this? I think the Lions are going to do fine. I think their team is really poised to do averagely well for their recent history. I think they could be a 10-win team. It really does come down to that week 1 matchup with us. What they do from there, it's anybody's guess. But I think if they win in Green Bay on week 1, which I don't want to see, I think they could probably go 8-9 wins deep and be a contender for the division. But I think it's going to really boil down to the Bears and the Packers.
When is Matt LaFleur's job on the line?
When does his contract expire?
Oh, you think that? I didn't know if there was going to be pressure beyond that.
I don't think so. No, not in Green Bay. I doubt, unless we went winless for 6 weeks. And when 6 weeks in, we should have at least 4 wins. If we go winless, then maybe. But it really depends on the circumstances. Do we go winless because Jordan Love gets hurt? Do we go winless because half our offensive line blows their ACLs? I think Green Bay is very forgiving on head coaches. Matt LaFleur's, he has some crazy record he could achieve. I think he's already the winningest Packers coach so many years into their debut or whatever. I don't see Matt LaFleur having trouble anytime soon.
How about that Bears schedule? Have you seen that, Lord Uther?
Yeah, I don't know how much I like it because Vikings, Lions, Cowboys, Raiders, Commanders, Saints, and I question how good the Raiders are going to be just because of God, why am I drawing a blank on his name? The USC coach, just because what's his name is there. Help me, Gold Rush. Why am I drawing a blank? What is wrong with me this morning? Because of the Raiders head coach right now. He was Pete Carroll. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Because Pete Carroll is there, so I'm not sure how they're.
I forgot that. Yeah.
So from what I've read, all the Raiders players are completely on board and in love with Pete Carroll. So we know that can make a difference sometimes too, right? Is having a coach there that you want to play for. They should beat the Saints, but then they got the Ravens, the Bengals. Should beat the Giants, Vikings, Steelers, Aaron Rodgers.
Wait, you've already said Cowboys, Ravens, Bengals. Like, those are some winners.
Eagles, Packers, and then the Niners in December, and then they finish up with the Lions. So, they're either going to be way out of the playoffs or they're going to be. I don't think there's any middle of the road here. I think they're either going to do extremely well or they're going to struggle. I'm going to be an optimistic Bears fan, just like every year, my friends. And I'm going to say first place in a division, Bears.
That's optimistic. That is very optimistic. I could see it. I'm not going to say I can't, but suffice to say the NFL season looks promising. I think we're going to see a lot of great matchups this year. Of course, the Aaron Rodgers story is going to be dominant, especially early in the season through when they play the Packers. What he does remains to be seen, but it could be good.
Let's do a quick prediction. Let's start with, does Aaron Rodgers make it through the season, yes or no, Gold Rush?
I don't think so, but I think it's injury. I don't think it's attitude, although you're going to get both. I think it's injury. I just think and it's not an injury like in the first season of the Jets when it's like his season is done in 2 plays. I just think it's the constant pounding, especially in that AFC North. I mean, don't think the Bengals and the Ravens aren't going to tee off on that. So,
do the Steelers make the playoffs or not, Gold Rush? Yes or no?
Yeah, no.
Okay, Urza. Aaron Rodgers making it through the season.
I think he does.
Playoffs for the Steelers.
I think they make it in. I think they win their division.
Wow. Very, very interesting. I will say he does not make it through the season, and Pittsburgh doesn't make the playoffs, and then I think you're going to see they're going to want Mike Tomlin's job. I think that might actually happen. So, and then Mike Tomlin becomes the hottest free agent coach out there going into next season because everyone's going to want him. I truly believe everyone's going to want Mike Tomlin. Oh, look, you don't like that, do you?
I'll take the counterpoint. I think if they don't make the playoffs, I think it ends up being Rodgers' fault. And I think he's on a 1 year. They're not going to blame Tomlin. I think they lose their GM, or maybe the head of the front office gets roasted. But here's the thing. I think the Miami Dolphins have another bad year.
Ooh.
And I think their head coach is out the door. And I'm going to throw it out there right now. They get John Gruden.
Oh, I like that. That's a good call. Hey, Urza Master, can you just jog my memory a little bit for all the haters out there who drink that haterade? Do you remember last year when you said that Lamar Jackson was going to lose it for the Ravens, and everyone was calling you out on that? Man, I just wonder, are you going to get called out again on this one because you didn't know what you were talking about, and then you actually did for all those haterators out there?
Oh, you bet. I think somebody's going to say, I don't know anything about Florida football. They're probably going to say, oh, he's a John Gruden fan, therefore he must be some kind of a misogynist because of all the scandal that went down. And don't get me wrong, what he did was wrong. I am in full support of the prosecution against him. I also think he's a great NFL quarterback, and like it or not, the NFL, stuff like that's going to happen. And the guy's probably paid for his crimes at this point, let's say. And yeah, I was right, by the way, about Lamar Jackson losing them the game. Don't get me wrong, and as folks on TikTok or wherever it was posted that they went off on me, as they learned, I'm a Lamar Jackson fan. I like the guy. I think he's a great player, great quarterback. This has absolutely nothing to do with race. I don't know how that got into the mix, but we all got accused of racism at one point last year. It has nothing to do with anything. Look, I'm not an expert in football. I'm just a fan talking out of my ass most of the time. But I was right, and by the way, I'm usually not wrong. That being said, I think the Ravens have a very good year. I also think Lamar Jackson remains their Achilles heel. Just like any other team's quarterback is the Achilles heel of the team, it's not an earth-shattering thing to say that if your quarterback screws up the game, you lose. Brett Favre did it 1,000 times. So,
and Dak Prescott in Dallas, you cannot tell me that it's all on him. Even though I was reading some stat where he's like one of the most accurate passers or something like that.
So is Kirk Cousins. How many Super Bowls did the Vikings win?
Right. There's still that intangible piece, and I know we're trying to wrap things up here, but I'm just going to throw one more thing out there. When you look at the Tom Brady's, and you look at, I'm even going to throw Brock Purdy into this, you don't have to have the biggest arm. You don't have to be the fastest runner. There is just that little something that you have that propels you to win or propels you to be a leader, and you can't always see it. You can't always hear it, but it's just, as the youngins would say nowadays, there's this aura about you that people buy into it, and it's something that just makes it happen. And it's kind of like I brought up a little bit with Caleb Williams. He has some of those athletic pieces that you really can't teach anybody, right? So the question is, can you learn that? Can Dak Prescott learn that? And can Lamar Jackson learn that to get to the point that they can get their teams deeper? So,
by the way, I quickly forgot. Where's Justin Fields this season? He keeps moving.
He's
around.
a Jet. Jets. Jets.
And he'll start, I'm sure, at some point.
Oh, he's starting
right away. Okay. And I think he's going to do well. Good for the Jets. Good for the league. Good for all you pundits out.
Good for us.
The Twitterverse and X and wherever whatever the next hot social media thing is. I don't know. Blue Sky. Do they talk football on there? I have no idea. But you can catch us here on Pending Rebrand all season long. We'll probably do more off-season updates as we get closer to that preseason mark. But from all of us here at Pending Rebrand, at Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear, Roast the Niner, are you ready for some football? We are.